It has to be very real. Now, how do you study that? How do you understand what the Torah means? The answer is, if you understand what it is in the world, then you'll know what it is in the spiritual world. And therefore, the technique we use is, we study the phenomenon in the world, you understand what love means, or homesickness means, or romance, whatever it is. And then from that, you can project it back into its source. Let's do that with laughter. So when you study the human faculty of laughter, it's very, very strange. Very strange. Because what makes us laugh is things that very often, I would say usually, are not funny at all. Very often they're painful. Here's a very tall, conceited individual walking down the street. He slips on a banana peel and he falls flat on his back. Why would you laugh at that? But even as you run to help him up, you can't hide a smile because... But it's very strange. By the way, when you're going through the experience, it's not funny at all. It's only when you're watching it from the side, right? But laughter happens when something happens and you realize, you know, there are many theories about laughter. We were speaking about Freud and about analysis, and there are many theories of laughter. Ever since the time of the Greeks, Western philosophy has been struggling to grasp what makes the human psyche experience humor and laughter in that way. It's very strange. Freud, by the way, struggled with this enormously. Freud wrote a whole book called Der Witz and its connection to the Unbewusstsein, to the unconscious. A whole book on that. And he fails to come up with a comprehensive theory. But one of the theories of laughter is called the superiority theory. That's one theory. Because when you see the person fall on a banana field, you feel superior. It didn't happen to you. Is that an adequate theory? Probably not. There's another theory called catharsis. That means that when you laugh, it releases spiritual energy. There's another theory called play theory. That laughter is a sort of a play. It's like a... But there's one theory that sums it up. And that is, by the way, a famous French writer, Henri Bergson. Henri Bergson? A Jewish French philosopher. He wrote a book called De Rire, Laughter and its Spiritual Meaning. Fantastic work. Amazing work. Very famous. But many authors and psychiatrists and psychologists and philosophers have tried to explain what laughter is. And there's one theory that says it all. Laughter is the response to a sudden inversion. When a thing goes in one direction and then you realize it's not going that way at all, it's going exactly the opposite way, right? That we call v'nahafuch. When suddenly the thing turns out to be exactly the opposite of what you thought it was. Even if it's not funny at all, it makes you laugh. Mother says, Oscar, are you driving? Yes, Mom. Are you driving on the highway? Yeah, I'm driving on the highway. Oscar, be really careful. The police say there's some crazy fellow on the highway going the wrong way. He says, Mom, there's lots of them. Now, that's not funny at all. Because somebody's going to get hurt. But, which means there's something very strange about us, that when those things happen, it makes us laugh. And the reason is that when something goes in one direction, and then it's suddenly and professional comedians, they do that deliberately. They'll take you in one direction, and when you least expect it, as strongly as possible, they'll flip it into its opposite. And the response is an inarticulate expression of joy. It's the response to unexpected total inversion, or incongruity, absurd incongruity, when two things are put together that are so absurd, right, that they... What does that mean spiritually? It means that the world progresses in one direction which looks hopeless. The world presents itself as material, given to disintegration, death, and yet, paradoxically, spiritually, that's the secret of life. Let me try and express it as clearly as I can. I know this sounds very strange, but the funniest event imaginable is death. That means that when we see a process that looks like decomposition and hopeless disintegration, And spiritually, you know that just beyond your range of vision is a life that makes this pale into insignificance. That is deeply funny spiritually. Again, these things are not funny when you're going through them. But they are, there's a famous work called the Gesher HaChaim. The Gesher HaChaim is a work on death and dying. And he goes through the halachas there of Avelus, Le'aleinu. But in the third section of that work, he discusses the spiritual meaning of dying. And he says what you have to know is when a person, unfortunately or that, stands at a situation of having to bury someone that was close to them, and it feels like hopeless tragedy, you have to know at the back of your mind that what's happening to that person is they're being moved into a dimension that is far transcending this. By the way, that's one of the reasons why you're not allowed to cry too much. You can't mourn excessively, because that's a lack of emunah. It's a lack of understanding this dimension. And he gives the most wonderful analogy. He says, imagine two twins in the womb. They're living this idyllic experience in the womb. Who could give me like those months that I spent inside my like Hashem protected me? And they live this amazing existence in their mother's body. And suddenly, after 9 months, these tremors begin, and the one child is thrust out into the world. The twin that remains must go into mourning for the brother who must have died. Little does he know that's only where life begins, beyond his range of vision. Okay, you need emunah for this, of course, right? And again, when you're going through the process, it's not funny at all. But spiritually, that's extremely humorous. There are a few doctors here. The Rambam, who was a doctor, he presents that image like this. He says, when a woman's giving birth, let's not forget that birth and death are very deeply connected. They both represent transitions from one dimension to another. We know that in halachic writing, the womb is called a kever. The same word that we use for the womb is the word for a grave. And we know that just like the seed is planted in the womb and it yields a child, people are planted in the ground, which yields a tchil. There's a very deep connection between the two. The reason we say Vatischat liyom acharon, that a woman can laugh at the day of death, is because in her own body she's been through that experience. What does that mean? So the Rambam, who was a doctor, of course, puts it like this. He says when a woman's giving birth, it looks like two people are dying. First of all, the woman herself. I always tell the men, imagine you're walking the corridors of your local hospital looking for the accounts department, when you accidentally take a wrong turn and you walk into the labor ward, and you watch a woman giving birth for the first time. You'd probably call the police. I don't know what you know. And if you went through it yourself, you'd need therapy the rest of your life, I can tell you. There's no question about it. But that's nothing compared to what the baby goes through. The child in the womb is being pushed out into a situation of guaranteed death. The child in the womb lives underwater with all the wrong anatomy. He's got no lungs, they're scrunched up little bits of tissue. He's got blood vessels coming out through his liver. He's got holes in the heart with the blood going in the wrong direction. He's got a big blood vessel taking all the blood away from his lungs in the wrong direction. He's got 25 conditions that keep him alive in the womb that guarantee death within 2 minutes when he's born. And you have 25 conditions that keep you alive, that if you gave him to the baby, you'd kill him immediately. It's not just difference, it's life and death opposite. I've delivered dozens of babies. And I can tell you, when you deliver that newborn child, you hold him in your hands, it's a hopeless situation. First of all, he's bleeding like crazy through the... He makes these terrible gasping movements, he goes blue and purple. No hope for this child. And suddenly, as you hold a kid in your hands, and the cord clamps down like a cable of steel and stops the bleeding, the holes in the heart close, the blood reverses direction, the blood vessels on the lungs close down, the blood hits the lungs. At the same moment, he takes his first breath, and 3 minutes later, it's all inverted and he's doing fine. That's very funny. And by the way, there must have been a lot of chimpanzees in the trees that didn't get that right during evolution. There must have been a lot of orangutans that you're talking about 2.5 minutes and it's all suddenly murdered. And a guaranteed death situation becomes life. So it's a woman who's been through it. And therefore we can say what a man can never say. By the way, for the doctors present, there's an amazing section in the Talmud that discusses the process of birth. It discusses the baby in the womb and all this thing. and it sums it up in one line. Listen to this amazing stuff.